Hey guys, what is up? Today we have another week of box office, so let's get into it. So up first we have & Juliet as always. This week it performed to 96% capacity. Last week, my mistake, and this week 94% capacity, going from 936K to 906K. Boop the musical is not doing so hot. Last week 93% capacity and 398K. And this week, 83% capacity and 548K. The average ticket is still under $100. In my opinion, Boop is not long for this world. I think if it can't get a Best Musical nomination, which I could easily see it not get, this could be our Lampica of this season. Because with a show as expensive as this is, it needs to make, I would estimate, between 700 at the lowest, but more likely it needs an 8 or a 9 in front of it every single week. And it's lost so much ground over previews that they need to have a 7 next week in order for them to really survive. They can't survive on these numbers. You know, a production as big as Boop, this is not sustainable. Something like a Kimbo or a Dead Outlaw can sustain this, even though it's still bad. Any show that has a 5 in front of it that's a new musical, regardless of size, it's a bad thing. But, you know, Dead Outlaw's weekly gross might be, they need to make 600K, whereas Boop the Musical's weekly gross might be, you know, 900,000. So Boop is tanking really bad. And I think the reason why is because of what it's based on. You know, Boop as a character is a very old IP. It's not really in the vein of your Beetlejuices, you know, your, I don't know, Back to the Futures, I guess, when it was successful in the beginning, where it's a much older show and it's appealing to kids and families, but kids and families could see Aladdin, they could see The Lion King, they could see so many other things, and I just don't think this has that buzz as an IP. And I think that one thing that I've never mentioned on the channel is that, you know, why did Shrek tank? Why did SpongeBob tank? These would be successful. But there were some IP brands that the general audience will look at and say, that's a terrible idea, and you have to convince them extra hard to see it. You know, that's why Disney shows tend to do good, is because, like, they're already based on musicals, you know, and there's so many IP musicals that people are sick of it, and they're less willing to take a chance. And I also think that Boop has a very similar story to Barbie, and I feel like they could have used a Barbie-inspired marketing tactic, whereas right now it's very plain posters, and the story isn't really introduced, and they have done some pre-recorded numbers, but I think that their marketing is their issue to an extent, but I think the real issue is that, just simply put, the show is just, the brand is not modern, it's not current enough, and with very mixed responses from audiences, and kind of from critics, it's kind of in this weird I don't know zone, and so therefore it's in an I don't know zone money-wise. So yeah, Boop, listen, everyone was coming after me saying, oh, Andre, it's like, you know, you're hating on Boop, and I'm like, I don't hate Boop, okay? I'm just saying it how it is, and we're now in the first week of non-previews, and it's still doing very bad, and that's just the facts. Vista Social Club had a very good week, playing to 92% capacity last week and 960K, to 91% this week and 958K. Cabaret, that Kit Kat Club, had its worst week yet, from 87% last week and 1,023,541 to 90% capacity and 846K. This is a huge L for Eva Noblezada, because I think this was a real test and if she could be a ticket draw, and she isn't. The illusion has been broken, and I honestly didn't think Eva would be a huge ticket draw. I think her being in Gatsby and her being in the right show gets the audiences to come, and again, Gatsby was so recently that people might not be clamoring to see Eva and Jeremy again. But again, I think that, you know, it's kind of destroyed her, it's taken away a lot of the capital she got from Great Gatsby. And as for Cabaret, there's rumors that Miley Cyrus is going to be in it, so I don't know if that's the case still. But most revivals tend to go a year, and so I feel like they should probably pack it up. Dead Outlaw started off solid. I mean, only had one performance, selling out, and 106K, and an average ticket of over $100, which is pretty good. I saw Dead Outlaw. My review is coming out, and having seen it, this is gonna be a tough sell. It's about a guy that dies, and then his corpse is just sitting there, and different people find him. That's the story. It's a very unconventional story. It's a very out there premise. It has a mainstream score. It's definitely not traditional Broadway, but just seeing stuff on Broadway Reddit and Broadway World, the message boards, and people walking out of the theater. People love this show. It's an amazing show, but there's this sense of people either don't know what to make of it. There's a sense that maybe it's ahead of its time, and that it's not emotionally as connecting or as straightforward as maybe Happy Ending is. For me personally, they're selling quite well, but I don't know if their average ticket is going to be very low. But I do know that their marketing has been pretty solid. They've been posting a lot on Instagram. They've really been hyping up the show. They had a fan event where they played music. They've released little snippets of the clips. They've done way more than a lot of other shows have. However, they aren't really focusing on the concept of Dead Outlaw. And with high concept shows like Dead Outlaw, Kimberly Akimbo, they focus on how amazing people say it is. But I feel like in this day and age, especially with the economy and everyone choosing to see the big movie stars and plays and IP properties, people don't care about reviews as much as they used to. They care about, what is this show about? Does this get me involved and invested? And I think that, let's take Inside Out, for example. That's a very out there concept. And if you just said it's an amazing 5-star review, but no one knew what the concept was, people would be a little bit confused, right? And I feel like Broadway needs to change its marketing tactics. And I feel like having teaser trailers akin to what Pixar does, or doing more movie marketing campaigns, would help them a lot. And like with Kimberly Akimbo, their poster didn't tell you what the show was about. This poster got way more people thinking, okay, this is what the show's about. It's colorful, it's fun, there's a roller coaster, it's colorful. Like that poster right there sells better than that poster. And same thing happens with Dead Outlaw. Dead Outlaw is it's a great cover, beautiful cover. Same thing with Kimberly Akimbo. But I feel like if you want a more marketable poster to really show off the extravagantness of your show, even though they're not extravagant shows, have more posters like the Kimberly Akimbo one than the OG Kimberly Akimbo poster. Maybe Happy Ending did this. The original poster was this, and then the original poster was this. And the new poster is way more visually stimulating, it's way more colorful, it's way more eye-catching, it's way more guaranteed to get people invested in what the show is about. And maybe Happy Ending is like the only major Broadway show in recent memory to not only change marketing companies, which happens a lot, but to then completely reboot their whole marketing system and showing off the show in a way that actually tells you what it is, tells you why people love it, and gives you that visual stimulant, which I think is so important for marketing musicals. And for Dead Outlaw, I think they need that, because I could easily seeing them do something akin to the Kimberly Akimbo poster. Unfortunately, we live in an era where these high concept productions, and we can go back to Fun Home or anything with Chisoli or Akimbo, when it's so high concept versus very untraditional but traditional story like Hadestown. The difference is Hadestown is a very traditional story that people can understand, but the music's very untraditional, where something like Dead Outlaw is both. And when you have both, it's way harder to sell to tourists, to old people. It's not a 4-quadrant show. You can't take your young kids. Granny might not think it's too loud. Granny might think it's too loud. I think this appeals to the 20-year-olds, the indie downtown crowd. And historically, those shows have not done good on Broadway. And Dead Outlaw's premise is so out there, and it's such a, I guess you'd call, singular, abstract piece, that I think people might have a hard time connecting with it or seeing why everyone's saying the show is so amazing. And I could see it struggling for that reason. I think that there are some shows that, no matter how good you market it, the concept is so out there that you're playing a huge betting game that oftentimes doesn't pay off. The only way Dead Outlaw, I think, goes to at least over a year, and even that's if it wins Best Musical. And even then, I don't think it would make it 2 or 3 years, because I think people would just stop seeing it after a while. And, that's kind of what happens. And I think COVID really destroyed the Best Musical brand. And Best Musical brand is like, after Hamilton, every Best Musical was doing financially much better than other Best Musical winners like Hadestown, Band's Visit, Evan Hansen, Hades, I think I said Hadestown. But then we got into post-pandemic, and we got Strange Loop, Akimbo, and those shows, as you know, did not do financially well and ran way shorter than they should have. Especially a Strange Loop. Didn't even make it to a year. So just by judging what the Broadway audience prefers to see, Dead Outlaw is going to have a much nicher fan base, and it's a show for niche people. That's what it is. That's calling it what it is. And those shows tend to not make $1 million every single week. Even if, as long as it stays in the 4s and 5s until the Tonys, it's fine, and then it'll get probably maybe 6s and 7s. And then if it doesn't win Best Musical, I think it could fall off pretty hard and close in January. But again, we'll see what happens. But again, I think I've explained it enough. But again, to summarize, it's such an out there concept that it might be hard for people to understand it or to really get behind it. And with there being so many other plays with big names in it and more conventional, easier to understand, and easier to get into musicals like maybe Happy Ending, people might just not make this their top priority, or rather, they're like, oh, this is good, but like, you know, it's a weird story. There are some shows that just will fail on Broadway because of their concept, you know, and that is Dead Outlaw, you know. It's inevitable, as Thanos would say. But we will see. We will see how it goes. But I don't expect it to do 800K, 900K pre-Tonys, or even after the Tonys. I can't see that happening. It's too weird of a show. And from a business perspective, a weird show is the worst thing you could have. But again, we need shows like this to make Broadway better, to make it artistic. And so while I'm glad that it's here, if you're going to invest in something like Dead Outlaw, you're going to lose money. And I think you're doing it because you love it, not because you're in it for the money, and we love those people. Death Becomes Her went from 92% last week and 1,086,788 to 90% and 1,109,717. Floyd Collins is doing pretty poorly, 80% last week and 509K to this week's 74% and 487K. And I've gone over how Jeremy, I think it really is just that Floyd Collins is a very obscure show. People like Eva have seen Jeremy and Gatsby, and so they're not rushing to see Collins. But I definitely do think this hurts Jeremy's stock in being a star that can, no matter the show, bring in box office. He's not a Daniel Radcliffe, he's not a Jonathan Groff, but he's getting there. Gypsy went from 71% to 74%, and 1,161,929 to this week's 1,154,839. Hadestown went from 98% and 804K last week to 95% and 798K, so another great week. Hell's Kitchen, last week 77% and 951K. This week 86% and 997K. So another solid week for Hell's Kitchen. Just in Time sold out 7 performances and 901K to 808K. A bigger drop than I probably would have liked, but it's still making gangbuster numbers. And it'll be interesting to see how long Jonathan Groff stays in the show, because I think he's the reason why the show is doing so well. Maybe Happy Ending continues to do amazing. Last week, 96% and 910K. This week, 93% and 874K. Moulin Rouge went from 88% and 1,055,306 to this week's 93% and 1,095,544. Mincemeat had another solid week, going from 97% last week and 773K to this week's 96% and 746K. Pirates, which is a limited engagement, went from 100% to 96% and 222K to 417K. But they have a very low ticket price. Real Women Have Curves is not good. Last week, 77% and 371K. And this week, 74% and 364K, which is pretty weak numbers. And last week, the past 2 weeks, it's had 8 performances. And typically, most shows that start this poor don't recover. And I think it's getting good reviews, but I think with maybe Happy Ending, with Dead Outlaw, I think this show will just get left in the dust, unfortunately. I don't have an interest in seeing it. I didn't love what I saw from it. But Again, it could be an underdog, but there can only be so many underdogs in a season, and it just feels like one of those shows that's gonna get left out. I know you guys don't like it when I say I feel like this isn't gonna last. Trust me, I've been right about this. It's not gonna last, and that's because I feel it. It's because it's that kind of show. You can just see it. There were some shows, the way they're marketed, the music, that you're like, I have a feeling that this show just isn't gonna hit. And I think the reason why it's not hitting is because I think it's just too overcrowded. I think it needed to come in another season. It's just overcrowded. I think that's really what it is. I also think that it's not necessarily a story that is the most intriguing. It kind of, I don't know. To me, it felt like a story that I've seen before, and I feel like that's maybe why people are not so interested in it. It's they're like, okay, it sounds okay, but it feels like something I've seen before, and so they're kind of like, there's Dead Outlaw, there's maybe Happy Ending, there's all these huge plays. It's just what happens. It's what happens to musicals, and you have to be really unique to stand out. And while it has great diversity and that makes it stand out, people go off of concepts, not diversity. Redwood did horrendous. Closed this thing when Adina leaves in August. 79% last week and 730K to 70% capacity and 595K. If this is with Adina, just imagine this without Adina. Yikes. Smash continues to do amazing. 89% last week and 892K to this week's 93% and 917K. So very interested to see how this does, if it doesn't get Best Musical, if it does. I don't know, mate. I still feel like it'll fall off in the fall. I still have a feeling like it'll close in January. I think it's going off a lot of buzz and excitement, but I feel like a lot of people that come out seeing it don't like it, and it's only been out for a little bit, so I think word of mouth on this show won't carry on. But I could be wrong. But I don't know, I have a feeling like Smash is in a good place now, but I think it could be very similar to New York, which was making $1 million, and then it just fell off hugely in June, like all of a sudden out of nowhere. And I feel like that could happen easily with Smash. But I could be wrong. But for right now, that's not the case. Stranger Things did much better, from 96% to 92%, 676K to 838K for 5 performances. Boulevard is not doing as well as it used to, 78% last week to 74% this week, and 1,012,546 to this week's 1,013,753. Gatsby went from 93% to 91%, and 1,069,646 to 1,070,227. And then the last 5 years, Haters Be Darned is doing fantastic. Last week 97%, this week 95%, and 714K to 822K. Is it doing merrily numbers? No. But for any musical, these numbers are solid, good numbers. Is it going to recoup? No. Is it kind of a disappointment to investors? Probably. But this is enough to save face for Nick Jonas to come back. Although I think that trick can only work so many times, so he should not come back out for a long time. I'm glad the show's being successful, and I guess the negative response from Nick is not happening, but I feel like a lot of the fans of Nick Jonas probably don't care about the negative backlash. So in that sense, it might be critic-proof. And then The Outsiders sells out 1,350,836 to this week's 1,322,444. So another amazing week for The Outsiders. So anyways, that's my video. Long video, lots to discuss, very intriguing. Let me know what you think, and peace. I'll also like, subscribe, comment, and follow me on Instagram.